Well, he had this great, ambitious idea for connecting the two oceans, and he's going to do so where? Panama, okay? All right, so I'm pulling down the world map here. And you see this really teeny, tiny, skinny strip of land that is called an isthmus, which is exactly what Panama is. It's an area of land that connects two larger bodies of land, an isthmus, okay? So that is obviously the most narrow spot in between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So if a canal was to be built right through there, you could, in theory, travel, and instead of having to go all the way around here, you could go right there. That's way faster, okay? Way faster. So Teddy Roosevelt thought it was necessary to have this canal because America is becoming such a naval power. So he instructs his secretary to negotiate a treaty with the country that owns Panama, and that was Colombia, this big country here. Panama was not its own country. Panama would belong to Colombia before we started negotiating. All right? Now, when he does this, the Colombian Senate rejects his offer of, I think it was $10 million and an annual rental fee just for the little area where the canal would be. All right, so he's basically flat out rejected, and he doesn't like that. He has very little patience for people who, in his opinion, failed to see the future of mankind, the future of history. All right, so what can he do? You're the president of the United States. You've had an ambassador rejected. What has America done in the past whenever we've attempted to purchase something? Usually we've gone to war. Well, he does not attack the people of Colombia directly. He decides to go about it in a roundabout way. He decides to exploit the aspirations of the people living in Panama. He finds out that the people of Panama want to be independent of Colombia. So what can he do? What would be his best way to exploit that?
Encourage them to throw a revolution.
That is exactly right. He instigates a revolution. He helps a people overthrow a government. You guys okay with that? Is that okay?
I mean, I guess if they want to be.
Well, does everybody in America get along today? Everybody in America get along? So would it be okay for Russia to come and overthrow our government? You guys okay with that? You cool? No! You think Colombia's cool with that? Well, they weren't. But that's what he did. He instigated a revolution, and it took about 5 days. But the rebels in Panama proclaimed their independence. So, now that Panama is its own country, what does that mean for Teddy Roosevelt's canal project? Does he have to even negotiate with Colombia anymore? Doesn't belong to Colombia. Belongs to a brand new nation called Panama. So what do you think happens then? Well, he doesn't even have to do that. He can just go start building because he helped them overthrow the government. So work began on the Great Canal, but this time, instead of it being built by the French, it was an American project. And if you look at this political cartoon, who can interpret this? What's going on here? We got
Panama Republic breaking free from Colombia
uh-huh.
and making a treaty with.
And what's hatching the egg of Panama? Intrigue. What is intrigue? Yeah, drama, uh, kind of behind the scenes dealings. And this says French Canal Company stock. This is because we bought the rights to the canal from the French, and ultimately it's all given to who? And once he receives this, what's he ready to do? Start digging, okay? Because that's all a canal is just a big ditch. Now, so work on the Great Canal began again, but at this time it was an American project. And Teddy Roosevelt could not resist to see it for himself. And he becomes the first president to ever leave the country in office to go to Panama and see the canal being built. Okay. All right. Now, also during his presidency, there is a conflict that's going on. This is a conflict that's occurring between Russia and Japan. America, believe it or not, is not involved in a war. But this war is called the Russo-Japanese War, because it's the Russians versus the Japanese. Okay. Roosevelt is pretty distrustful of the Japanese because he fears what could happen in the future if they gain a very good stronghold in the Pacific, which eventually they do. And Roosevelt's afraid of that. And so he does not want the Russo-Japanese War to end very lopsided. It's not that he really cares who wins. He doesn't want one country to be completely dominant in that region. He wants it to kind of end as a draw. And so he takes it upon himself to try to arbitrate this war, to try to mediate, to try to bring it to a peaceful conclusion without fighting. And so he invites people, leaders from both sides to America. And he's going to host them, and he's going to try to bring about a peace. So he invites them to his home. He lives in New York, but he lives like kind of up along the Hudson River in New York, not like New York City. He does have a home in New York City, but his actual home is along the Hudson. So he begins to work behind the scenes with both sides of the Russo-Japanese War, and basically he's pretty clever about it. Like, he invites them onto his boat. He has an enormous, I don't want to call it a yacht, but it's a large boat. And they have lunch together. And it's a standing lunch. They don't have seats. Why do you think he chose to have a standing lunch without having a sit-down lunch? Why do you think he chose to have a standing lunch on the deck of his boat? Have you ever heard the expression, "my right-hand man"? Whoever were to sit at his right side, that would be a slight to the person who doesn't get to sit at his right side. So if he let the Japanese person sit on his right side, the Russian people would feel slighted. And if the Russian sat at his right, then the Japanese would feel slighted. So in an effort to prevent anybody from getting their feelings hurt, everybody just stood and ate. It was planned out. And then they worked behind the scenes. Eventually, the destination of the boat was Portsmouth. And that is the site in which they were able to hash out the terms of cessation of arms. They quit fighting at the Treaty of Portsmouth. Basically, each side could go home and say they won. They both proclaimed victory. If both are proclaiming victory, nobody's really winning. But they do. They both could go home and proclaim victory. And what they were fighting over was territory in the Pacific, like Korea. Russia believed that they had ownership of Korea. The Japanese said, oh, no, you don't. So Russia abandons any claim they had to Korea. Japan wanted to be paid for the cost of the war, and they dropped that because they felt it was the Russians' fault. And then there was this island that they had kind of been fighting over called Sakhalin, Sahkalind, Sakhalin. They just split it in half and said, Russia, you get half, Japan, you get half. And they stopped fighting, and the war was over. Just a big deal. Yeah, to be able to bring a peaceful conclusion to war without fighting and loss of human life, that's awesome. And Teddy Roosevelt wins another first. He becomes the first American to ever win a Nobel Peace Prize for his mediation of the Russo-Japanese War. He wins a Nobel Peace Prize because he was able to come to an agreement to end this. Okay, questions on Roosevelt? Pretty interesting guy. Once he serves out McKinley's term and he wins one term of his own and he says, I'm done after that. He said it was one of the greatest regrets of his life that he didn't serve two of his own full terms. Which there was nothing stopping him. But after he won his election, he announced that he wouldn't run again. And that really took the teeth out of his administration. He really regretted it. So when he retires, he just kind of goes and he spends some time with his family. He goes on an Amazon, like rents a boat in the Amazon with a bunch of people to take him on a tour, and the boat kind of crashes and they get stuck in the Amazon. He breaks his leg and he gets malaria and he almost dies. And that probably took about 20 years off his life, that trip. But he eventually makes it home and eventually dies quietly in his sleep. Kind of a bummer for TR. Okay. Probably eating a dozen eggs a day didn't do much for his health either. All right, so he's president up into the first decade of the 20th century, and also what happens after his presidency is, there's the first ever great conflict in the world. Can you guess what it is? Say it again. Before the Great Depression happens, this does. World War I. You guys remember seeing this graphic from last year? World War I. Now, this graphic says World War I was caused by an animal. Is that literally what I'm trying to tell you? No. Animal is what's that called? Anagram? Is that what it is? Each letter stands for something. All right, so let's look at how World War I is caused by an animal. All right, so when World War I begins, we have to look at the causes, okay? These are largely attributed to be the causes of World War I. You cannot just point to one of these and say, oh, that's the reason why. Much like the American Civil War, there's lots of things that caused it. World War I is also like that. So I'm going to go over pretty much each of these in no particular order. So the first one we'll do is nationalism. Nationalism. Now, although many Americans really, really wanted to stay out of the war, several factors made American neutrality very difficult to maintain. America, by the time World War I begins in 14. Um, America was an industrial power, an imperial power. Uh, the United States was feeling the same pressures that had led many nations of Europe into devastating warfare in previous years. And historians attribute these reasons, like nationalism, to be one of the things that brought America into the war, and also a cause of it in general. So, what is nationalism? Who can give me a definition? Yeah, pride in one's own nation. Devotion to the interests and culture of your own nation. That's nationalism. So, how could nationalism lead to war? It does. How? You guys love Shady Spring and Liberty. Love those schools, don't you? You just love them. You love everything about them. Do you mean we have a competitive rivalry with them?
Yeah.
Yes. Do you think that because you have patriot pride, you have pride in your own school? So it would be difficult to go, yay, go Tigers! Yay, go Liberty! Liberty! Right? It'd be tough for us to do that because nationalism leads to competitive rivalry. All right? We're kind of antagonistic of one another. An atmosphere of competition is created by nationalism. Okay? Does that make sense? Just an atmosphere of competition. We're better than you because we're the best, and that's why. Because you have pride in your own country, pride in your own, whatever it is. All right? Next, imperialism. For centuries, European nations had been building empires. And for like a decade, America had been. But when these European nations are building their empires, they're slowly extending their influence, their control, whether it be economic control, political control. And they're extending it over various regions and people of the world. The whole purpose of imperialism is that the countries that are owned, colonies, what do they supply to the imperial mother country power? What do they provide? They provide the raw material and the resources. The mother country makes the manufactured goods. Germany was I'm not going to say a newer country, but as Germany was industrializing, it was creating competition with the two greatest imperial powers on the earth. What were those two greatest imperial powers on the earth? They've been imperial powers for hundreds of years. Britain and France. Britain, France, Germany are all very close to each other geographically. In addition, France and Germany even border each other. So as Germany industrialized, it was competing with France and Britain in contest for colonies. You only got so much of the planet that you can assert your authority over. And America's already said, hey, this half of the earth, butt out. Who was the last president that said that leading up to World War I? That's right. What is that official statement known as?
Roosevelt. Some C word.
It is some C word to the.
To the Monroe Doctrine.
That's right. The Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. All right. So the nature of trying to snatch and grab as much land as possible does create this idea of competition, and so that's how imperialism and nationalism kind of together create an atmosphere of fighting. And you can see this particular cartoon, you have different countries. These are the leaders of certain countries: England, France, Germany. And you can see they're all digging in, and what they're digging into are places that they want to have control of, like Zulu, which is in Africa, Turkey, I can't remember, Afghanistan. Those are places that they want to colonize for their natural resources. All right? Another factor that caused World War I is called militarism. Militarism. Anybody want to take a stab at militarism?
What's it do with the military?
That is very, very good. It does have to do with the military.
Like every country wants to have like the biggest military.
For what purpose? Lydia said every country wants to have the biggest military. Why?
Intimidation.
For intimidation. Not to use it. Just to scare others. Like, oh my gosh, they have a 3 million person army. We better not mess with them. However, though, once everything boils over into actual violence, you have 10 armies on the earth and they all have 10 million people in it. What is that a recipe for? Death and destruction on a scale never before seen in human history. Up to this point, World War I was the most deadliest war in the history of the planet until World War II. Okay? So, empires, you're going to build this empire. You're going to have land all over the world that you want to control. That's expensive. It's very expensive to build your empire. And it's also very expensive to defend. So the growth of nationalism, pride in one's own nation, the growth of you expanding your empire, imperialism, that leads to a need to increase your military spending. Because each nation wanted to have a very strong armed force. Especially if we're competing with other countries, we want to have a stronger armed force than the other people. And so you see a buildup of very much a large buildup of armed forces. And the purpose of this is to kind of show off. We're going to show off our power, and also to be used as a deterrent. We better not mess with them. They got a big, strong army and navy. Okay? By the year 1890, the strongest nation on the European continent was who? Can you guess?
Britain.
Not Britain. It's a really good guess, though. On the European continent. Ja. The Germans, ja, das ist gut. The Germans. The Germans had set up an army reserve system that drafted and trained young men. They had greatly expanded their military might. Now, this is not Hitler, guys. This is pre-Hitler, okay? This was all done by a German king because they were an imperial country. His name was Emperor Wilhelm. And that's with a W, like Wilhelm, but it's Wilhelm. And anyway, so Germany was greatly expanding their power, and when the German emperor, Wilhelm, in Germany they wouldn't have called him emperor. In German they would have called him Kaiser. Kaiser, like a Kaiser roll, because he's like an emperor, just like Julius Caesar. Caesar, that's where the word Kaiser comes from, emperor, okay? So Kaiser Wilhelm was the emperor of Germany, and he decided that his nation should become a major sea power. Now, if you look at the map here, Germany doesn't really have much in the way of sea coast, because a lot of this is shared with Denmark and Holland. And so in order to do this, they had to expand their military significantly so that they could become a major sea power, because they wanted to successfully compete with the country, the empire that does have the greatest sea power, Britain. They want to beat the British. The British had the strongest navy ever since the 1600s when they beat the Spanish Armada. The British have dominated the seas for 400 years. And that's no different in 1890. So the Germans want to be able to compete with them, and so pretty soon both British and German shipyards began to compete to build the biggest, the fastest, the strongest, the largest battleships, destroyers, cruisers, warships. Now, if nationalism's going on, what do you think other imperial powers are going to do when they see two of their rivals building up their military? They're going to build up theirs. So France, Italy, Japan, and even the United States quickly joined to build as many ships as they could. In essence, creating a naval arms race. In the 50s and 60s, we had a nuclear arms race. Who can build the most nuclear bombs? But in pre-World War I, we have a naval arms race. Who can build the most boats? The most destroyers, warships? Okay? All of this deals directly to militarism. All right? Another cause of World War I is the alliance system. The alliance system. By the year 1907, there were two major defense alliances in Europe. And they each go by different, they have, like the same alliance will have different names. First is the Triple Entente. It's a French word, Entente. Also known as the Allies. So Triple Entente. E-N-T-E-N-T-E. Entente. It's French. You have to say it out of your nose. Entente. Also known as the Allies, which consisted of France, Britain, and Russia. That's in 1907, okay? The Triple Alliance, not to be confused with the Triple Entente or Allies, but the Triple Alliance consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Who together with a future power, which is just out of reach of this map, known as the Ottoman Empire, which is mostly the Middle East and Turkey, they later become known as the Central Powers. So Triple Alliance is also known as the Central Powers, and the Triple Entente is also known as the Allies. Things evolve over time. There's people that switch sides during the middle of the war. Okay? So just know that there's two sides. Allies versus the Central Powers. Both of these are alliances. Okay? What is an alliance? Give me a definition of the word alliance. If I were to say, I'm going to forge an alliance with you. Yeah, we're going to have an agreement, a formal agreement to cooperate together. Okay, that is what an alliance is. So, the purpose of this is that we're going to merge our forces and our resources together so that if somebody messes with us, they're not just messing with one country, they're messing with everybody. So really the purpose of the alliance system was to try to be another deterrent to prevent war. Okay? So like, hey, if I'm Germany and I'm buddies with Italy and Austria-Hungary and the Ottomans, if France comes and messes with me, I'm not alone. I don't have to mess with just it's not going to be me and France. It's going to be me and all my buddies against France. And so France is much less likely to try to mess with me because I have all my buddies. Do you see how this could cause potential for world war? Yeah, because all my buddies are going to go up against all your buddies. And pretty soon the entire planet is fighting with one another. And that's exactly what happens with World War I. The entire planet is fighting with one another. hence the name World War I. Okay? All right, there's more causes for World War I, and we will discuss those on Monday. Hope you guys learned something today.